mean radius alone is meaningless. That's not hyperbole, nor is it clickbait. It's a simple statistical truth, and today I'm going to show you why that is, rather than try to explain it in numerical terms. Because numbers have this negative connotation with people in a lot of cases. When you see a number, the more decimal places there are on that number, the further and further it gets out here, the more precise it appears to be to you. And the more precise it appears to be, the more it seems to smack of the truth in many people's minds. Well, that's not the case with certain numbers. Certain numbers are nothing more than an average, and that is the case with mean radius. So we tend to believe things as truth when in fact they are relatively meaningless. So let's start with a simple understanding of what mean radius really is. Mean radius at its essence is the average distance from the center of the group for each and every shot within the group. Let me give you an example. Let's start with a 2-shot group. Yes, I know 2 shots is not a group, it's just 2 shots fired at the same aim point, but that's good enough for this explanation. With our 2-shot group, our group center is going to be directly between the 2 shots. The group size is the distance between the shots. And the mean radius is half of that distance because you're only measuring from the center of the group to each shot individually and then averaging those 2 numbers. Because they're identical, you're going to get that value. Now, if we add another shot to it, this time hitting right in the middle of the group, right at the center, the only thing that changes is the mean radius. The group size hasn't changed, but the mean radius has. In this case, the mean radius shrinks to 2/3 of the size it was before. Is everybody with me still? Mean radius does not define group size. Your group size is likely to be bigger than your mean radius at all times. That's why mean radius is a really feel-good number. It makes for really small, very precise numbers that makes you feel good about yourself when you're done shooting because it's half of the group size at very best. Well, when we get into multi-shot groups, like these 10-shot groups here, we start to see some interesting patterns. And that's what I want to show you today. Because I can tell you all day that the number is meaningless without something else, but I can show it to you in graphic form so that you can understand it intuitively. Let's start with this one up here. This first group is what you would expect from a mean radius of 1. All of these groups have a mean radius of 1, which means the diameter of the circle is 2. With this one, we have all of our shots distributed basically inside and just around the edges of the circle. This is what we would expect and want from a mean radius of 1. However, this group also has a mean radius of 1 and is much, much larger. As you can see, mean radius didn't tell us anything about the performance of the rifle, and especially not about those flyers. And there's other variations as well, like this one, that has many shots outside of the circle and kind of scattered about a bit. You see, mean radius in and of itself, being identical on all 3 of these groups, gives us drastically different outcomes of our group size. And it is the proximity of shots to each other during shooting that defines our success in competition shooting, in hunting, and in, well, our shooting sports. So we want to make sure that we're using a metric that makes sense. In this case, mean radius alone isn't telling us the entire story. But there is another piece of the puzzle that can make it a little better. But even that isn't going to solve the problem entirely. What am I talking about? I'm talking about standard deviation. If we add the standard deviation to these particular numbers because they are averages, we can get a better characterization of what's going on. Now, remember, anytime we're measuring anything during load development, we are trying to predict the future based on past performance. And if we have a prediction of the future based solely on the average, we have nothing. We have to have the standard deviation because there's variation in everything. If we take all of these and include the standard deviation, we start to see a pattern. The ones with big flyers have big standard deviations on them. And the ones with smaller flyers tend to have smaller standard deviations, and the ones that congregate around the circle itself tend to have the very smallest standard deviations. But that doesn't help us completely because the standard deviation goes up even when the majority of the shots are in the middle of the circle and there's just a few around the periphery, which is a good outcome as well. So we can't solely rely on standard deviation to define whether a mean radius is any good or not for us. We are also going to have to measure the group size and take a look at the group shape. Is the group round? Is it stretched out one way or the other? Because those are key things to look for in our group analysis. Because analyzing our data is probably one of the most critical things we can do when we're doing load development in order to get the best outcome possible so that we get the best shooting rifle possible so that we have success in our shooting sports. And that's the total message for today. Mean radius without standard deviation is meaningless. Even with standard deviation, it can fool you pretty easily. You're going to have to measure your groups for group size, and you're going to have to look at the groups to see if you have flyers or not, because mean radius is not going to tell you that story. All right, guys, until next time, shoot straight, measure carefully, because it can change your outcomes. And I'll see you in the next video.